She stood on the auction block like livestock, head held high while men shouted numbers at her future. Eleanor Marsh had survived worse than humiliation. She had buried a husband, lost a farm to drought, and walked 300 miles with blistered feet to reach this godforsaken cattle town in West Texas. But standing here in the scorching July heat of 1889, while strangers appraised her like a broodmare, this carved something new and bitter into her chest. $500, called the fat man with tobacco-stained teeth. $600, countered another, leaning forward with eyes that made her skin crawl. Eleanor kept her gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the crowd. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. The auction house had promised honest work placements for women willing to sign labor contracts. What they had not mentioned was that desperate men came here to buy wives the way they bought mules, with cash and no questions asked. Then a voice cut through the crowd, low and steady as river stone. $2,000. The bidding stopped. Heads turned. Eleanor's eyes found him at the back of the crowd, tall, lean, weathered by sun and wind. His hat brim shadowed a face carved from hard angles, but his eyes were clear gray, neither cruel nor kind. Just tired. Sold to Mr. Dalton Graves, the auctioneer announced, surprise sharpening his voice. Eleanor descended the wooden steps on trembling legs. Dalton Graves approached, counted out bills with calloused fingers, and signed the contract without reading it. He turned to her finally, his expression unreadable. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes." "Good. We leave now." 6 weeks earlier, Eleanor had been someone else entirely. A widow with 2 acres and a milk cow in Kansas. Then the bank foreclosed. The cow died, and a smooth-talking agent promised her honest employment in Texas if she would just sign on the line. She had trusted the wrong man before. She would not make that mistake again. Now she sat behind Dalton Graves on a sturdy roan mare, riding west into country so vast it made her heart ache. They did not speak for hours. The land stretched endless, rolling grassland broken by limestone ridges and scattered mesquite. No towns, no people, just sky and earth and the rhythmic creak of saddle leather. When the sun began its descent, painting the world gold and crimson, a ranch appeared on the horizon. Not grand, but solid. A stone house with a wide porch, a barn, corrals, windmill spinning lazy circles against the sky. Dalton dismounted and helped her down. His hands were brief and impersonal. "I will be plain with you," he said, leading the horse toward the barn. "I need a wife by law. The railroad is coming through. They are buying up land, pushing out small ranchers. Texas statute says a married man with a working homestead has first claim on disputed territory. Without a wife, I lose everything." Eleanor followed, studying him carefully. "You paid $2,000 for a legal loophole. I paid $2,000 because you looked like you could survive out here." He unsaddled the mare with practiced efficiency. The others looked like they would break. It was not a compliment. It was an assessment. Inside, the house was clean but bare. Functional. A man's space, absent softness or decoration. "You will have the bedroom," Dalton said, setting her small bag on a chair. "I will sleep in the barn until the paperwork clears. We marry tomorrow. Reverend rides circuit. He is in town now. After that, you are free to do as you wish within the bounds of this ranch. And if I run," he looked at her directly, "I will not chase you. But there is nothing for 200 miles in any direction except heat and men worse than me." Eleanor lifted her chin. "How do I know you are not worse?" For the first time, something flickered in his gray eyes. Not anger. Weariness, maybe. Or respect. "You don't," he said quietly. "But I give you my word. I will never touch you without permission. This is a business arrangement. Nothing more." He left her. Alone in the house. Through the window, she watched him walk to the barn, shoulders heavy with burdens she could not yet name. That night, Eleanor lay awake in a stranger's bed, staring at rough-hewn ceiling beams. She had been bought, purchased like cattle. The shame of it burned. But beneath the shame, something else stirred. Dalton Graves had not leered, had not touched her, had offered her shelter and honesty when he could have demanded anything. She thought of the men at the auction, the ones who had bid with hungry eyes. She thought of the contract she had signed, binding her to this land, this man, this fragile thing called survival. At dawn, she would marry a stranger to save his ranch. But as exhaustion finally claimed her, one thought circled back, persistent and strange. What if she was worth more than the price he paid? The circuit preacher arrived at noon, riding a mule and carrying a Bible held together with leather straps. He performed the ceremony on the porch in under 10 minutes. No music, no flowers, no witnesses except the wind and a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. "Do you take this woman?" "I do." "Do you take this man?" Eleanor hesitated. Dalton's gray eyes met hers, steady and without pressure. He was giving her one last chance to refuse. "I do," she said. The preacher pronounced them married, accepted $20, and rode away without staying for coffee. Eleanor became Mrs. Graves in the time it took to fry an egg. The days that followed fell into careful rhythm. Dalton rose before dawn to work cattle and mend fences. Eleanor cleaned the house, planted a vegetable garden, mended shirts worn thin at the elbows. They spoke little, moving around each other like dancers learning steps without music. He kept his word. He slept in the barn. He never entered the house without knocking first. He treated her with distant courtesy, like a business partner whose presence he had not quite adjusted to. But Eleanor watched him. She noticed things. The way he left fresh water by the door each morning. The way he repaired the porch step without her asking. The way his shoulders tightened when riders passed on the distant road, his hand drifting unconsciously toward the rifle by the door. One evening, she asked directly, "Who are you afraid of?" Dalton paused in the doorway, hat in hand. "Railroad men. They want this land. They have lawyers and money and no conscience." "Why this land specifically?" "Water. The creek runs year-round. Controls access to grazing for 50 miles. Whoever owns this ranch controls the valley. And a wife makes you harder to remove. A homestead marriage claim is harder to break in court." He looked at her steadily. "You gave me legal protection. In return, you have a roof, food, safety. That was the arrangement. Is that all I am?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Legal protection?" Something shifted in his expression. "What else would you be?" Eleanor did not have an answer. She turned back to the stove, cheeks burning. That night, unable to sleep, she walked onto the porch. The Texas sky blazed with stars, more stars than she had ever seen, scattered like thrown silver across endless black. She heard footsteps and turned. Dalton emerged from the barn, carrying a blanket. "Thought you might be cold," he said, offering it. She took it. Their fingers brushed. He pulled back as if burned. "Why did you really bid so much?" she asked quietly. "You could have paid half that for any of the others." Dalton leaned against the porch rail, staring out at the dark land. "My mother was sold once. Not at auction, but near enough. My father bought her contract when she was 17. He was not kind." He paused. "When I saw you standing there, head up, eyes hard, you reminded me of her. I thought if I could give one woman a choice, maybe it would balance something." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I am sorry. Don't be. She survived him, raised me and my sister. Taught us both that a person's worth is not determined by their circumstances." He finally looked at her. "I may have bought a contract, Mrs. Graves, but I don't own you. I never will." Before Eleanor could respond, hoofbeats shattered the night quiet. 6 riders thundered into the yard, torches blazing. Dalton moved instantly, pushing Eleanor behind him. Dalton Graves, called the lead rider, a man in an expensive suit that looked obscene on horseback. "I represent the Texas and Pacific Railroad. We are prepared to offer you $5,000 for this property. Final offer. Not for sale," Dalton said flatly. The man smiled without warmth. "We have lawyers who say otherwise. This land was never properly filed under the Homestead Act. You have no legal claim. I am married now. Homestead statute requires a legitimate marriage." The man leaned forward. "We know what you did, Graves. Bought a woman off an auction block 6 days ago. That is not a marriage. That is fraud." Eleanor felt Dalton tense beside her. "We leave by noon tomorrow," the man continued, "or we come back with the sheriff and remove you both." They rode off, torches trailing fire into the darkness. Dalton stood motionless, defeat carved into every line of his body. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I thought this would work. I thought," he stopped. "I will not let them hurt you. In the morning, I will take you to town. Give you money. You can go wherever you want." Eleanor stared at him. This man who had paid $2,000 to give her a choice. This man who slept in a barn to keep his word. This man who was about to lose everything because he had tried to do something decent in an indecent world. "No," she said. He turned, confused. They said fraud. Eleanor continued, her mind working fast. They said this is not a legitimate marriage. It is not. Not really. Then we make it real. She stepped closer. A marriage becomes legitimate through consummation, through choice, through commitment. Her voice steadied. I choose you, Dalton Graves. Not because of a contract. Because you gave me back something I thought I had lost. What? My worth. They did not speak of it again that night. But when dawn broke across the Texas hills, painting the limestone ridges gold and crimson, Eleanor woke in the big house knowing everything had changed. Dalton was already awake, standing on the porch with coffee, watching the horizon. She joined him. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he turned to her. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. I can fight them another way. There is no other way. Eleanor met his eyes. You know that. I will not trap you into something you don't want. You are not trapping me. She took the coffee cup from his hands, her fingers warm against his. I am choosing. There is a difference. She saw it then, the wall he had built around himself beginning to crack. Not crumbling, just opening, letting her in. Why? He asked, and the vulnerability in his voice made her chest ache. Because you saw me as a person when everyone else saw livestock. She set down the cup. Because you kept your word. Because in 6 days you have shown me more respect than my first husband did in 5 years of marriage. She paused. And because I think you need someone in your corner as much as I need somewhere to stand. Dalton studied her face as if memorizing it. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached for her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. Then we do this right, he said. Not for lawyers or railroads. For us. That morning, they rode together to the creek that ran through the heart of the ranch. Dalton spread a blanket beneath the cottonwood trees, and they sat together in dappled sunlight, speaking the words that mattered. Not legal vows. Real ones. I promise to see you, Eleanor said. Not as property or convenience, but as you are. I promise to stand with you, Dalton answered. In whatever comes. They sealed the vows simply, his lips against hers, gentle and sure. And for the first time since the auction block, Eleanor felt something other than survival. She felt hope. At noon, the railroad men returned with the sheriff, a tired-looking man who clearly wanted no part of this fight. The lead lawyer dismounted, paperwork in hand. Mr. Graves, you have until. Our marriage is legitimate. Dalton interrupted, Eleanor standing beside him, their hands joined. Consummated and committed. Witnessed by God in this land. You want to challenge that, you will do it in court. The lawyer's smile faltered. We have resources you cannot match. Then use them. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice clear and hard. Because I am not leaving. This is my home now. My land. And I will fight you with everything I have. The sheriff cleared his throat. Ma'am, if you are willing to testify that this marriage is legitimate by your own free choice, the homestead claim stands. That is the law. Eleanor looked at the lawyer. I married Dalton Graves of my own free will. This ranch is our legal homestead. You come back here again without a court order, and I will defend my property. The threat hung in the air. The lawyer glanced at the rifle leaning against the porch rail, at Dalton's unyielding stance, at Eleanor's fierce eyes. He had expected a purchased woman, frightened and silent. He had not expected this. This isn't over, he muttered. Yes, Dalton said quietly, it is. They rode away in a cloud of dust and impotent fury. The months that followed were not easy. The railroad sent lawyers twice more, but each time Eleanor and Dalton stood firm, their claim unshakable. The ranch grew. Dalton bought more cattle. Eleanor started teaching children from neighboring ranches in their front room, her sharp mind and steady patience making her invaluable to families scattered across the lonely country. They worked side by side. Two people learning to build something real from a transaction that should have been cold. Some nights, Dalton played fiddle on the porch while Eleanor mended clothes, the music drifting across the darkening land. Other nights, they sat together in comfortable silence, watching stars wheel overhead. One evening, nearly a year after the auction, Eleanor stood at the creek where they had spoken their true vows. Dalton found her there, her hand resting on her stomach, her expression distant. What is it? He asked. She turned to him, tears shining in her eyes. Not sad tears. Something else. We are going to have a child. Dalton froze. Then slowly, wonderingly, He dropped to his knees before her, pressing his forehead gently against her stomach. I was wrong, he said, his voice breaking. That day at the auction, I thought I was buying legal protection. I thought I was saving the ranch. Eleanor ran her fingers through his hair. You did save it. No. He looked up at her, gray eyes bright with unshed tears. You saved me. The ranch was just land. You made it a home. You made me remember what it means to be human. She pulled him to his feet and kissed him, deep and sure. We saved each other, she said. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Eleanor and Dalton would exchange glances across the dinner table, a look that held everything. The auction block, the desperate bargain, the moment they chose each other for real. Your father, Eleanor would say, smiling, paid too much for me. Best money I ever spent, Dalton would reply. And in the laughter that followed, in the warm chaos of the home they had built from ashes and will and unexpected love, no one could argue. He had bought her to save his land. But she had been worth more than everything.